Relatives are part of our lives in a quiet and complicated way. We don't choose them, but they stay connected to us through time, memories, and shared history. Some of them feel close, like friends we grew up with. Some feel distant, even if they are related by blood. And some exist somewhere in between, present but not fully known. When I think about relatives, I think about different kinds of connections. There are relatives we see often and relatives we only meet on special occasions. There are relatives who know our stories and others who only know our names. Still, they all carry a piece of our past, whether we like it or not. Relatives are often connected to childhood. They appear in early memories, in family gatherings, in photos that capture moments we barely remember. Even when time passes, those early connections remain somewhere in the background of our minds. They shape how we understand family, belonging, and identity. Some relatives feel familiar and safe. Being around them feels easy. Conversations flow naturally, silence feels comfortable, and there's no need to explain who you are. They already know. They have seen different versions of you, growing slowly over time. Other relatives feel more distant. You might share a last name or a family story, but not much else. Conversations can feel polite, careful, sometimes awkward. There is a sense of connection, but also space. That distance doesn't mean something is wrong. It simply reflects different paths in life. Relatives often come with expectations. Sometimes those expectations are spoken, and sometimes they are silent. Expectations about behavior, success, relationships, or choices. These expectations can feel supportive, or they can feel heavy. They can create comfort or pressure. Family gatherings are moments where relatives come together. These moments can feel warm and joyful, or overwhelming and tiring. Different personalities in one place, different opinions, different ways of seeing the world. It's a mix of familiarity and difference at the same time. There are relatives who love to talk and share stories. They remember details from years ago, bringing the past into the present. Their stories repeat, but each time they carry emotion, nostalgia, and meaning. Listening to them feels like touching a piece of history. There are also relatives who are quiet. They observe more than they speak. They sit calmly, listening, sometimes smiling, sometimes lost in thought. Their presence is subtle but meaningful. They contribute through silence rather than words. Relatives can reflect parts of ourselves we don't always notice. Through them, we see similarities in habits, expressions, and reactions, a laugh that sounds familiar, a gesture that feels known, a way of thinking that feels inherited rather than learned. At the same time, relatives can be very different from us, different values, lifestyles, and priorities. These differences can create distance, but they can also create understanding. They remind us that family does not mean sameness. Relationships with relatives change over time. Someone who felt close in childhood may become distant in adulthood. Someone who felt distant may become closer later in life. Time reshapes these connections quietly, without announcements. Some relatives play a strong role in our lives. They offer support, guidance, or comfort. They show up consistently. Their presence feels stable. Others appear briefly during certain moments and then fade into the background again. There are relatives we miss even when we don't see them often. Their absence is felt quietly, a thought that appears suddenly, a memory triggered by a place or a moment. Missing someone doesn't always require closeness. Sometimes it comes from shared history alone. Relatives also carry family traditions, small habits, celebrations, and routines passed down through generations. These traditions create continuity. They connect the past with the present, even when details change. Sometimes relationships with relatives are complicated. There can be misunderstandings, unspoken feelings, or old conflicts. These situations can feel heavy. Still, they are part of the reality of family life. Not every connection is simple, and that's okay. Distance can exist even within family, physical distance, emotional distance, or both. People grow, move, change. Distance does not erase connection completely, it changes its form. Some relatives feel like strangers at first, especially if time has passed. But once conversation begins, something familiar often returns. A shared memory, a shared name, a shared past. These things reconnect people quietly. Relatives often know stories about us we have forgotten. They remember who we were before we became who we are now. That perspective can feel comforting or uncomfortable or both. It reminds us that identity is not fixed. There are moments when relatives come together during difficult times, loss, illness, or change. During these moments, connections feel stronger, differences fade, and what remains is shared experience and support. Relatives can also influence how we see relationships in general. Through them, we learn about closeness, boundaries, forgiveness, and patience. Even challenging relationships teach something, often without intention. Not all relatives stay in our lives forever. Some connections naturally fade. This doesn't always mean conflict. It simply reflects change. Life moves forward and paths separate. Still, even distant relatives often remain part of our inner landscape. Their names, faces, and stories stay somewhere in memory. They form part of the background of who we are. Family photos often capture relatives together, frozen in time. Looking at these photos can bring mixed emotions: joy, nostalgia, curiosity, and sometimes sadness. Photos remind us that relationships evolve, but moments remain. Relatives are connected not only by blood, but by shared experiences, shared meals, shared spaces, shared celebrations. These experiences create bonds that last beyond words. Some relatives feel like home. Being with them feels grounding. It feels familiar, even after a long time apart. Others feel like visitors in our lives, present for moments, then gone again. As time passes, our understanding of relatives often changes. As children, we see them simply. As adults, we see complexity. We understand their choices, struggles, and limitations more clearly. This understanding can bring empathy. It can soften judgments. It can create space for acceptance, even when differences remain. Relatives remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, a network of lives connected across time, a story that began before us and continues after us. Even when relationships are imperfect, they are real. They carry weight, meaning, and history. They shape us quietly, often without our awareness. Relatives are not just people we are related to, they are part of the context of our lives, part of the background that supports, challenges, and defines us. And, whether close or distant, simple or complex, relatives remain connected to us in ways that go beyond daily interaction. They exist in memory, identity, and shared past. Relatives also shape how we understand time. When we see older relatives, we see the past reflected in their faces, voices, and stories. When we see younger relatives, we see the future beginning to form. In this way, family connects different moments of life into one continuous line. There are relatives who tell stories about times we never lived through. Their words paint pictures of places, traditions, and moments that existed before us. Even if we never experienced those things, they become part of our inner world through storytelling. Some relatives express love openly, through words, gestures, and constant presence. Others express love quietly, through actions, reliability, and simply being there. Love takes different forms within family, and learning to recognize those forms takes time. Not all relationships with relatives feel equal. Some bonds feel strong and natural. Others feel fragile or distant. This imbalance can be confusing, especially when expectations suggest that all family relationships should feel the same. But in reality, connection varies. Relatives sometimes act as mirrors. Through them, we see parts of ourselves reflected back. Sometimes we recognize familiar patterns. Sometimes we see traits we don't like. This reflection can be uncomfortable, but it can also be clarifying. As life changes, the role of relatives changes too. When we are young, they may guide and protect us. As we grow older, roles can shift. We may become the listeners, the supporters, the ones offering care. These transitions happen slowly, often without clear moments of change. Some relatives remain constant throughout life. They are present through different phases, adapting quietly as circumstances change. Their presence feels reliable, even when communication is infrequent. Other relatives appear only at certain points: childhood, special events, difficult moments. Their presence is brief but meaningful. They leave an impression that lasts beyond the moment. There are relatives we feel grateful for, people who showed kindness, patience, or understanding when it mattered most. Their influence stays with us, shaping how we treat others and how we see ourselves. There are also relatives who challenge us through disagreement, misunderstanding, or difference. These relationships can feel difficult, but they also contribute to growth. They teach boundaries, resilience, and self-awareness. Silence can exist between relatives, long periods without communication. That silence can feel heavy, or it can feel natural. Silence does not always mean disconnection. Sometimes it simply reflects distance in time and space. When relatives reconnect after a long time, the interaction often carries a mix of familiarity and strangeness. Old memories surface, but present realities may feel unfamiliar. These moments reveal how much people can change while still remaining connected. Relatives are often present during major life transitions: births, weddings, losses, and changes. During these times, family connections feel more visible. The shared experience creates a sense of unity, even if differences remain. There is a shared language within families: expressions, jokes, references that outsiders may not understand. This shared language creates intimacy. It reminds us that belonging does not always require explanation. At the same time, relatives can represent different worlds, different beliefs, cultures, or ways of living. Navigating these differences requires patience and understanding. It also requires accepting that agreement is not always possible. As we grow older, we often reevaluate our relationships with relatives. We see them not only as family members, but as individuals with their own stories, struggles, and dreams. This shift can deepen empathy. Relatives carry emotional history. Past moments, both joyful and painful, influence present interactions. Sometimes this history is visible, sometimes it remains unspoken, but it is always present in subtle ways. Distance, whether physical or emotional, can change how we relate to relatives. Time apart can soften conflicts or create new perspectives. It can also create gaps that feel difficult to bridge. Both experiences are part of family life. Some relatives feel deeply connected to our sense of identity. Through them, we understand where we come from. Family names, traditions, and stories provide context. They anchor us in a larger narrative. Even relatives we rarely see contribute to this narrative. Their existence reminds us that our lives are part of something broader than daily routines. Relatives can influence how we experience holidays and celebrations. These moments often carry strong emotions: joy, nostalgia, longing, or tension. Family gatherings bring these emotions to the surface. Over time, relationships with relatives often become quieter, less dramatic, less intense. This quietness can feel peaceful. It reflects acceptance and familiarity. There is also a sense of responsibility that can come with family. Responsibility to stay connected, to show care, to maintain ties. Balancing this responsibility with personal boundaries is an ongoing process. Relatives teach us about compromise, about meeting halfway, about letting go of certain expectations. These lessons are not always easy, but they shape emotional maturity. Some relatives feel like reminders of who we used to be. Being around them brings back old habits, old ways of speaking, old versions of ourselves. This can feel comforting or unsettling. As time passes, loss becomes part of family experience. Relatives leave, and their absence creates space. That space is filled with memory, stories, and quiet presence. Loss changes how we see remaining connections. Remembering relatives often happens unexpectedly. A smell, a song, a place. These moments bring them back briefly, reminding us that connection continues beyond physical presence. Relatives help define what family means to us. Through positive and difficult experiences, we form our own understanding of closeness, loyalty, and care. And even when relationships are distant or complex, relatives remain part of our emotional landscape. They influence how we see ourselves and others, often in subtle ways. In the end, relatives are not just people connected by blood or marriage. They are shared history, layered memories, and ongoing stories. They exist in the background of our lives, shaping us quietly as we move forward. And whether we feel close to them or far away, relatives remain woven into the fabric of who we are.